Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Jamie Morin has been elected a Fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration, recognizing his leadership in defense budgeting, cost analysis, and strategic planning. He's here to reflect on what drew him into public service, what's changed in public administration, and how he hopes to contribute to the Academy's mission. Jamie, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Congratulations on being a newly elected Fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. What does that honor mean to you?
Well, gosh, the number of folks that I have admired over the years who are fellows of the Academy is pretty impressive. And so it was humbling, but really a wonderful recognition. I was deeply honored.
Well, it reflects a lifetime of service. Tell us about what motivated you to begin public service in the first place.
You know, I take it back to family influence for one. I was raised with a really strong tradition of making the community stronger. My mother's a school teacher, has worked with autistic children for most of her career, still working in that field. And both my parents just had a really strong commitment to the community. So it starts with that, right? And then for me, I grew up in the late Cold War, and that built in me a really strong interest in national security. And so I was struck that a meaningful way to serve and to strengthen the nation was to work in a career in national security. And it's been just enormously rewarding and fulfilling.
As you think back across that career, you served in the Air Force, you served at DOD level. What stands out as one of your most meaningful accomplishments in the public administration space?
Well, you said accomplishments, but let me start with a moment. You know, I guess this will sound hopelessly naive in these cynical days, but the first chance I had to take the oath to uphold the Constitution when, as a graduate student, I guess I was 22 or 23 years old, I was offered the chance to work in the Pentagon on requirements and plans. And to be pulled into something, you know, much, much bigger than yourself, to be pulled into incredibly consequential matters and to do it with a devotion to those principles in the Constitution, that, just being in that moment as a young person was a tremendously shaping experience for me. So that's where I would have to start. And, I've probably taken that oath personally 6 or 7 times since. I've administered it dozens of times. I had the privilege of presiding at a graduation ceremony from basic military training with, hundreds of young people starting a career in military service. But you keep coming back to, we are offered an opportunity in this nation to uphold a constitution that's bigger than any of us, bigger than the politics of the moment. And that's a great starting point. To the accomplishments, I've worked mostly in resource management, in making smart decisions with the taxpayers' money, chief financial officer for the Air Force, cost assessment and program evaluation for the Department of Defense as a whole. So the biggest opportunities for impact in roles like that are when you can get something started on the right foot. And the things we do in national security, particularly in developing technology, it takes time. We're trying to do really hard things, but I had the opportunity with both the Air Force and working for the Secretary of Defense to get a few really consequential and major programs started. Thinking about the B-21 bomber for the Air Force, for example. It had been a long time since the U.S. Air Force had been able to buy a bomber on something approaching planned cost and planned schedule. And it looks like we're on a path to be pretty darn close to that on that program. And so that's a tremendous thing to be able to look back and say, hey, we've been working on this. It's a big deal. Billions of taxpayer dollars critical to the success of the joint force. And, I was able to have my fingers all over that at the outset. So that's a significant one. Moments of crisis. We've recently gone through a government shutdown. I had the challenge of operating through a few of those as Air Force CFO and working in OST, and some close calls as well as actual shutdowns. Those are searing moments where leaders have to make tough decisions. Again, with the Constitution first and foremost in our mind, our system isn't always perfect, but it is ours, and it's our responsibility to operate within it and to make it better. And then finally, I guess I would highlight people in that the public service is an important calling. It demands things of people that are different than what we ask of people in the private sector. And because it's sometimes hard for people to get their feet under them in the complexity of an organization like the Department of Defense or many of the other federal agencies, we have to make long-term investments in our people. So being able to be involved in hiring and developing talent and giving people an opportunity to really accomplish their potential, and then to also send them forth to go do bigger and better things, whether in government or outside. Those have been just tremendously rewarding for me.
I'm speaking with Jamie Morin. He's Vice President of Defense Strategic Space at the Aerospace Corporation and a newly elected Fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. Jamie, you told some great stories there, but early in that last response, you mentioned the oath of office and allegiance to the Constitution. You've seen in your service firsthand how trust in government can be tested in times of fiscal uncertainty and strategic transition, and we're certainly in that right now. How do you view the current state of public administration, and what can it do to help increase public trust in government?
Yeah, I think approaching public administration as an exercise in continuous improvement is really important. We have to always be willing to question the how of how we get things done. Take advantage of new technology, take advantage of new concepts and approaches. We have to do that still with an eye to the core principles, right? Public service is a public trust. We have to conduct ourselves in public administration in such a way that there is no question about the integrity with which people work and that they are doing things with the right ends in mind. We're talking about a nation approaching its 250th birthday, so the timelines and the time horizon that the public administration has to think about is different than what we as individual humans have to think about, or what even long-lived companies have to think about. We have to take that long-term perspective for the betterment of the nation. But again, you've got to balance that with responsiveness to changing needs. The needs that the public administration meets in a time are shaped by the time. They're shaped by the technology. They're shaped by the psychology of the citizens. They're shaped by the external environment that we operate in. So continuous improvement, willingness to adapt, but founded on those core principles of what government is about and the Constitution we uphold. I think that's the bottom line for me.
Well, and you also mentioned the importance of people. If you were speaking to someone just starting out in public service, perhaps in defense analysis or budgeting, what advice would you give them about building a career that really makes a difference?
Yeah, again, I would start with coming in for the right reasons. Every once in a while, I run into people who are entering public service with a plan to sort of hop, skip, and jump their way through it. I'm not sure that's the right approach. I think that there are certainly great opportunities for people to come and depart from government service and have careers that cross those boundaries. I think that's very useful. But, it really should be about the mission of the agency and the national interest, not so much the personal interest. And so I find that people that come in with that perspective generally do better, right? If you're thinking about how can I accomplish things for the citizens, how can I deliver on the promises of government, those people are more likely to both enjoy themselves and have a positive impact than those who are, kind of climbing their way up a ladder. But the other piece I would suggest is that reputation matters. People's ability to get things done in complex environments, whether big bureaucracies or just very difficult missions with lots of factors that have to come together. It depends on credibility. It depends on creativity. It depends on being seen as a team player and someone, again, who's willing to make sacrifices to get the right things done. And that's a hard-earned reputation. And it's one that's also easy to lose if you make bad choices. So, I really, as someone who is an adjunct professor at Georgetown now and teaches students who are really interested in public service, these are conversations I have all the time. I encourage people to look at the career, and I encourage them to look at it from a mission accomplishment perspective, because that's how it's going to be most rewarding for them and for the mission that they're trying to actually support.
I've been speaking with Jamie Morin. He's Vice President of Defense Strategic Space at the Aerospace Corporation. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and congratulations on your election as a Napa Fellow.
My pleasure. Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up-close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying I need to be a great leader and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But The two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them are just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done, and you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who've moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that, frankly, would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question: who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all, somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.